Hello everyone and welcome to Hand Stamping 101 for Beginners. First thing I'm going to do is show you some things that you're going to need to get yourself started with hand stamping. Hand stamping is traditionally with metal, but you can also stamp things like leather and softwoods. But here I'm going to show you hand stamping with metal. Metals like aluminum, brass, copper, etc. The first thing you're going to need is a letter kit. These are letter punches. Some people call them letter stamps. This one is an ImpressArt brand. ImpressArt has some really nice stamps. This one is called Wonderland. This is my favorite font to use. I also have some more basic fonts, but this is the one I used mostly because it's a more decorative font. I found this online. You can pretty much only get ImpressArt online unless you find somebody that's a distributor, but you can find other stamps in basic fonts, like Arial or Monotype Corsiva or things like that at Hobby Lobby or Michaels. But if you're a beginner, I recommend starting off with something simple like the all caps Arial font that you can find at Michaels or Hobby Lobby. It usually comes in a red kit and it comes with letters and numbers, and that's a good way to get yourself started. The second thing you're going to need is a bench block. This is a solid steel block. They come bigger, but this is a good size for all of the smaller work that you're going to be working with at first. Mine is well loved. As you can see, I've used it a lot. It also has some tape stuck to it because you can use tape to help center your work. Usually you can use things like masking tape, or there actually is some tape out there that's made specifically for hand stamping that can help you either mark your place to center your project, or there's also some that gives you a nice straight line across your work if you want to do something very straight and very uniform. Some people like to do it to where it's a little off-center a little bit, and it looks a little more handmade that way. But some people prefer a straight line, so you can use either the tape they sell specifically for that, or you can use masking tape. Masking tape is much cheaper. Another thing you're going to need is a hammer. This is just an ordinary household hammer that I use because it's nice and heavy. I work with a lot of stainless steel and a lot of the thicker, harder metals that require a heavy hammer to stamp them. If you're working with something light like aluminum or a really thin piece of copper or brass, you won't need a hammer this heavy. You can use something like this small ball peen hammer. I got this at Michaels. This is good for a lot of your thinner blanks you can find out there, or any of your thinner metals, like aluminum. It doesn't stamp very hard, but it is very precise. It's got a nice round end that fits really good with the end of the metal stamp. I also got this at Michaels. This is a solid brass end hammer. It's got a nice heavy end. I don't use this one very often, but I do use it for certain projects. Some people prefer the brass hammer. I prefer the household hammer. It's whatever your preference. There's also decorative metal stamps. You can see this one is a heart. There's lots and lots of different decorative stamps out there. ImpressArt has a lot of really nice decorative stamps and flourishes, and they also have some really wonderful fonts too. Like I said, this one is Wonderland, but they have a ton of other ones that are really cool. They have, for the decorative stamps, you can find these at your craft store too. They usually have hearts and stars and moons and clouds, and I even found one that said hope in really little bitty letters, and that works good for a lot of your smaller work. Another thing you're going to need, stamping blanks. These are just some brass stamping blanks I have. These haven't been polished or anything yet. That'll be further on in the video on how to polish your work when you're finished. But this is just a standard brass blank. It does not have a hole. I bought these without holes, and I'll show you how to remedy that also later on in the video. And you're just going to place it on your bench block when you're ready to work, and you can use the tape I said to either hold it in place or to mark where you're going to want to stamp the letters. There are some other different kinds of stamping blanks out there. These come in all different shapes and sizes. This is a 5/8 inch stamping blank, but there's lots of different sizes. As small as 8 millimeter, and there's even some that are a few inches around. There's also pieces of metal like this that I machined and buffed off the edges. This is a piece of aluminum. I also have a nice piece of copper here that I have buffed and polished. As you can see, it has a nice mirror finish. These make really cool necklaces, and I sell these in my shop on Etsy, as well as my main domain shop. These make wonderful gifts, and people really like that they can personalize them. And you'll just stamp whatever names they want on them or sayings, and then you're going to buff and polish it and add a chain, and they have a wonderful, wonderful gift. It's great for the holidays. Another thing you can have, it's not, you don't have to have it, but it's nice to have, and that is some polishing rouge. Some people call it polishing compound. This is a really good one because it's good for all metals. You can find this on eBay. I got a smaller piece of it on eBay, which is good for specifically aluminum, and then you have bigger silver metals. Another thing you can have, it's not required, is a rotary tool. And I got this specifically for the buffing feature. And it comes with a lot of different size buffing wheels. And it's a great tool to help you buff, and that way you don't have to buff by hand. If you're going to buff by hand, you can use any standard rag. And you're just going to rub some of your polishing rouge on it and then rub the metal. And it leaves a black on the rag, so use a rag that you don't like anymore, because it's going to ruin the rag. But that's how you can polish it. The next thing we're going to show you is how to stamp your first couple of letters. If you're a really, really new beginner and you're not really sure how it's going to work, go to the hardware store and buy yourself some washers. These are really good to practice on, because if you mess them up, they didn't cost that much. Stamping blanks tend to be a little more high dollar and a little harder to find, and if you mess them up, that's just a loss in your budget. Go buy you some washers, doesn't matter what size. I got this size because it's a nice good size to practice many times on it. And that way you can just stamp whatever you want on here to find out what either the font looks like, or how you're going to have to hold it to get the letter to come out correctly. Things like that. And it's a great thing to use without spending a lot of money. So next step, I'm going to show you a stamp on the washer, and then a stamp on an actual stamping blank. Okay, first thing we're going to do is, we're going to practice on our washer first. I'm just going to set the washer, whatever piece you're using, down on your bench block. Like I said, you can use masking tape to either hold it to the surface, or if you want to do a straight line, but I recommend when you're practicing, just leave it sitting here, and that way you can practice how your stamps work. We're just going to grab the letter A. And grab the letter A. And the letter S. There we go. Letter A. These are 3 millimeter size letters. You're going to want to hold it straight up and down so that it makes a nice, clean, uniform stamp. Later on, when you've gotten a little more used to your stamping kits and you notice that letters like this letter H right here, I noticed that sometimes it didn't want to stamp the top of the H or either the bottom of the H. Some of these more decorative pieces, it's a little hard to get them to be a uniform shape, so you can actually learn to rock the piece as you're stamping, and that way it gets the top and the bottom of the piece when you're stamping. So let's do the letter A first. And this is a little noisy. You don't want to do this when anybody's sleeping or anybody needs to be quiet, because it does get loud. And as you can see, there is a letter A stamped on there. A nice solid letter A. Okay. Now, from there, you can practice however many things you want on these washers. You can use both sides typically, and that way you get really familiar with your stamping kit. When you're ready to move on to something a little more permanent that you're either going to wear yourself or sell or give to a friend or family member, you can go ahead and get you some stamping blanks. You can find them online or you can find them at a craft store. I'm just going to do some initials here. I'm grabbing a little R. As you can see, I rock back and forth a little bit when I stamp. You can see the little R. Just going to do my initials here just to show you. I guess I keep it straight up and down. Tap. When you become more familiar, you can rock it back and forth like I do to make sure you get all of the letter on there. Some people mark their stamps with a Sharpie marker so they know the bottom of the letter is facing them, because when I first started I did a lot of upside down and sideways letters because I wasn't paying attention. So if you want to mark your stamps to where the bottom of the letter, you mark on that side so that side's always facing you, and that way you know your letter is always in the correct direction. You don't want to ruin a piece of metal by stamping something in the wrong direction when you're going to make it for somebody. Okay. Now that that's done, as you can see, it'll be stamped on there. If you happen to stamp too hard and it bows the piece of metal a little bit, you flip it over and you just tap it just a couple of times and it will flatten it back out. It doesn't do anything to the letters. As you can see, the letters are still stamped on there. It just flattens your piece of metal back out straight. Okay, since this one does not have a hole, the next thing we're going to show you is what you're going to need to be able to stamp holes in it so you can hang it from a necklace or whatever you're putting this piece of jewelry on. It's a wonderful tool, and I will show you what that is in the next step. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is punch a hole in our stamping blank, since it did not come with one. You can buy them with holes, but a lot of times you find them without holes. And this is what you're going to need to stamp the holes in your stamping blank. These are called metal punch pliers, and I got these in Michael's. They're about $12 to $15, depending on where you go, but they're a really handy tool to have. I don't recommend using these for thicker metal, like you wouldn't want to use these to try to punch a hole in this washer. You would need something like a power punch kit, like I'll show you later in another video, to punch the holes in the thicker stuff like this. The metal punch pliers are good for your center pieces of metal, like this stamping blank right here. You can either make a mark with a Sharpie marker at the top after you've centered your hole. That way you know where to stamp it, or punch it rather. And that way it gives you a good guide, and it's not going to be there anymore once the hole is punched in it. Or if you just feel like eyeballing it, you can do that too. You're just going to center it up on there, and you can see the piece of metal is in there. There's a hole in this part of the pliers, and that's where the punch goes through. And you just hear it pop, and it has punched a hole in your metal. And you're just going to stick your ring, you're going to wiggle it, and then it pops right off. Now, as you can see, there is a hole in our blank. Now that the hole is punched, Some people like the kind of rustic look of it. It's a little rough and it's not very polished. Some people like that look. Other people who like the high polished look is the next step that we're going to work on. You're going to need the polishing rouge or polishing compound. And you're going to need a rag if you're going to do it by hand, or if you happen to have a rotary tool like this one, you can use your rotary tool. Once you punch, sometimes it bows the metal a little bit. You just put it back on your bench block upside down. Give it a few taps, and it's back to being flat again. So the next thing we're going to work on is polishing. Okay, on to polishing. To finish your piece of jewelry, now like I said, if you're just going to do the more rustic look and it's a little bit of a rough look, you can actually use a thin point Sharpie marker and go in the groove of the letters, and that darkens your letters. If you're going to do the polishing look, as you polish it, it actually darkens the letters for you. It's kind of cool how it works. For the people who want a more polished look, this is what you can do. Get your polishing compound, whichever kind you're going to use. If you're going to do it by hand, like I said, use an old rag if you don't care about getting black stuff all over. You're going to rub some of that polishing rouge on your rag. And then you're going to sit there and you're going to rub it on the piece of metal. And let me show you what it does. You look at the rag. You look at the rag, it has a nice dark, kind of a black area on it. And that's what it does when you're polishing a piece of metal. Now, I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but you can kind of see an area that has been polished as opposed to an area that has not been polished just by hand. Now, if you want a super high shine, go and get you one of these rotary tools. You can find them at hardware stores. You can find them at any of the bigger tool stores. The Chicago Electric one is good for just your simple stuff. It's not super, super high powered, but it does the job. What you're going to do is you're going to turn it on once you have a buffing wheel on here. You're going to put it on the edge of your polishing compound. Get some on there. Now, when you're using a rotary tool like this, it's going to, not sure you can see, it's going to stain stuff everywhere. And then, you're going to turn it on. You start at one end. You work one spot. And you move a little bit. Even go over the letters, it's not going to hurt the letters. Like I said, it'll actually darken the letters a little bit. When you're using a polishing rouge or a polishing compound, it'll leave a little bit of the black stuff on the metal, but don't worry, that rubs right off. Make sure you get it all the way around. If you want to do both sides, you can. For this one, it's going to do the one side. Okay, if you want, you can rub a little bit more of your polishing rouge on there when you go to just wipe off the excess. You're just going to rub it in there. Sometimes some of it really sticks, but don't worry, it comes right off. And then if you look, this has a nice, super high shine. Almost like a mirror finish. And if you can tell in the video, it did darken the letters a little bit so they're easier to see. And now your piece is ready to be hung on a jump ring for a necklace or to personalize a bracelet or whatever you're going to do with it. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to kind of wrap up and go over the things that you will need to get yourself started. Okay, we're just going to go back over the things that you're going to need to get yourself started with hand stamping. The first thing we went over is your alphabet stamping kit. They have some that are the alphabet and numbers, but this one right here I have is the Impress Art Wonderland font. You know, like I said, it's a more decorative font, and it shows you on the package what the letters look like. Like I said, it's a really nice font for your more decorative work and kind of the higher end hand stamping stuff. Now, the other thing you're going to need is a steel bench block. And this is your stamping surface. You don't want to use your table or anything like that because you will ruin your table. You want this nice, hard, solid steel surface so your stamps are uniform, clear to see. If you wish to do more decorative stuff, you can get the decorative stamps like this heart that I have here. Like I said, the Impress Art has a bunch of really nice decorative stamps and flourishes. They even have animals and things like that. And they have a really nice quality decorative stamps. But you can also find your regular decorative stamps like this one at any of your local craft stores like Michael's or Hobby Lobby. Okay, the most important thing you're going to need are your stamping blanks. This is just my bag of brass stamping blanks that I have. You can find stamping blanks in all colors, all metals. I don't recommend stamping on plated metal. Sometimes you can find silver-plated brass at craft stores that are good for other things, but if you're doing a lot of heavy stamping, you're going to end up chipping the plating right off, especially if you're doing a high polish with your rotary tool. The rotary tool will probably catch some of that plating and pull it right off. So I recommend doing solid metals like solid aluminum, solid brass, or solid copper. Copper always has a really nice finish. Another thing that's not necessarily needed, but your polishing compound is a good thing to have if you want a high polish. And of course your hammer. You gotta have a hammer. You can't hand stamp without a hammer. And like I showed you in the beginning of the video, there are different kinds of hammers. For beginners, I recommend, like I said, going and getting you some washers to practice on. These are super easy to practice on. If you totally screw it up, it's not a big deal because washers, you can get a pack of 25 to 50 for a couple of dollars. Not necessary, but another great tool to have is this rotary tool. It comes with the 80 different tips. My favorite is the buffing tips, but you can also use the sanding tips if you're trying to buff down a piece of metal that is sharp. You can buff down the edges of it. Also, your metal punch pliers. If you buy blanks that don't have holes, I recommend the metal punch pliers. I recommend anywhere from 1.5 to 1 3/4 hole. Don't go any bigger than 2 millimeters because then it's just a really giant hole, and the jump rings just won't look right on it. So try not to get any bigger than 1 3/4 millimeter for your punch pliers. But if you can only find 2, that works too. Like I said, there's many different pieces of metal out there you can stamp on, many different shapes. There's just a lot of things you can do with hand stamping. I hope you will join me for some of my future videos on the higher up levels of hand stamping and some that are a little more in depth on how to make certain projects. Thank you for watching my video.